Thank you. So our panelists this afternoon are the Reverend Ann Ellsworth. Say hi, Ann.
Hi, guys.
She's the Interfaith Outreach Coordinator with Save Our Schools in Arizona. The Reverend Kathryn Mary, known to us as Kammy Young, missioner with the Episcopal Diocese of the Central Gulf Coast, that is Western Florida and Southern Alabama, and a leader with DART, the Direction, Action, and Research Training Center. And Reverend Rob Ater, Associate Pastor of Immanuel Presbyterian Church in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So good to have each of you with us this afternoon.
Thank you.
Rob, why don't we start with you? We're going to do some introductions and just tell us, you know, your name, where you're geographically located, though I just already said it, but you can repeat that again. And what do you do in your context as an organizer? And then also, what first called you to community organizing?
Sure. I'm Rob Ater. As Lally said, I'm an associate pastor at Immanuel Presbyterian Church in Milwaukee. I've been here for about 14 years. And just as I came, we started work with starting a new Industrial Areas Foundation, IAF group in Milwaukee that became Common Ground about 10 years ago. And I've been a part of Common Ground since the very beginning. Our congregation was one of the founding congregations that helped start Common Ground and officially make that happen and support it with funding and support from the very beginning. So I've been a part of that and have gotten involved in different ways over those 10 years. My first sense of call, I think you said, or feeling called into this kind of work, when I was in seminary 15 years ago, I did a dual degree program in social work, and so I learned about community organizing from a theoretical perspective, about Saul Alinsky and his work starting with union organizing in the 1930s and 40s, and then used to have an opportunity then to apply what had actually learned in the classroom about what's important about folks not coming in and saying this is what we want to do to help you, but actually building relationships, listening, and building from the grassroots up. So that's a little bit about me.
Great, thanks so much. Kammy, would you go next?
Sure, thanks. So I just left a position of serving with the School of Theology in Sewanee, Tennessee, part of the University of the South, where I was on the faculty with the contextual education program. I've been a priest for 25 years, and especially these last 10 years have found that the practices of community organizing were the essential practices of Christian discipleship that have been missing in the life of the church and in our preparation as pastors, preachers, and teachers. Mm-hmm. So that's why I went to the seminary to work on incorporating the principles of community organizing and the practices that we can draw on as leaders in the church and kind of have people be equipped as they leave for that. In my role now, over the last few months in Pensacola, Florida, instead of Sewanee, Tennessee, I'm using these same principles and practices to start a congregation-based community organization in Pensacola, an interfaith coalition of congregations here. We're planting the seeds and laying the foundations for another 22nd organization in the network of currently 21 cities across the country that have DART affiliates. I serve on their board of directors, and so I'm a missioner planting those and organizing right now clergy in the Pensacola area to come together. And the other role I have is with the Diocese of Central Gulf Coast, the Episcopal Diocese, using those organizing skills to mentor and guide people in planting congregations and doing work on the evangelism with the diocese and leading congregations to connect with missional engagement in their communities around them, knowing their context, those kinds of things. I was introduced to organizing in August 25th of I'll reclaim that I can't recall the date. I'll pull back and just say 10 years or so ago. Yeah, in a year-long conversion process. I first attended a Rethinking Justice workshop in which I heard the dean of our cathedral speak to a group of people from all different faith traditions at a Catholic church in Jacksonville, Florida. And he quoted Martin Luther King Jr. about love and power, that us preachers especially, and all of us throughout civilization, had gotten it all wrong and thinking that love and power were polar opposites, when in fact power without love was reckless and abusive, but love without power was sentimental and anemic. The seeds of conviction were planted in that phrase that I could not let go of, that rang true with my 15 years of ministry in the church as an ordained leader. And it moved to being convicted and converted when an organizer, the DART organizer for Jacksonville and the Interfaith Coalition for Action, Reconciliation, and Empowerment, asked me why I only brought one person with me to the Nehemiah Assembly, to which I had committed 50 people, that just my persuading them, because they loved me so much through an email, wasn't enough to get them to show up, that I hadn't practiced these practices. And then finally at a training, a 5-day DART training, where I discovered these essential practices of discipleship that were what I'd been looking for my whole adult life, that were the missing piece in my Christianity, in my life of faith, and in my leadership of congregations. It's what I'd been looking for, and finally had the tools to do something. So thanks for inviting me to share, and I'll invite Ann.
Great.
Yeah, my name is Ann Ellsworth, and I'm a priest in the Episcopal Diocese of Arizona. And I've been a priest for 3.5 years. So for me, but I've been doing ministry for a very long time. And for me, when people ask me, about the connection between organizing and ministry and organizing, kind of similar to what Kammy said, for me, ministry is organizing. And organizing is ministry. And so it's very natural for me to feel that I am called to a priestly vocation in organizing, because it's ministry in the world, bringing together the people of God from all places to help reset that power balance. And so I mostly work right now in public education advocacy, and I serve as the Interfaith outreach organizer for Save Our Schools Arizona. And Save Our Schools Arizona is a 1-year-old organization that was hatched at an Education House Committee hearing, where a bunch of moms who were really concerned about ed funding showed up. We did not know one another. When we left that night at about 11 p.m., we did know each other, and we have stayed in touch. And the fruit of the relationship and the fruit of friendship has been ongoing social change in our state. But I think there was a question, like, what first called you to community organizing? So it was an experience with ministry. We have a Catholic worker named Andre House here in Phoenix. I'm a former Roman Catholic, and it was an experience at that Catholic worker, being in relationship with the people who were being offered services, ideas about solidarity and option for the poor and common good. That shaped my experience as a Christian. And so that is kind of now can be we can call it organizing, but it just kind of felt like a call to discipleship. And so the writings of Dorothy Day have been very influential in my life. And the idea of the social teaching of the church has been really formative for me as well. So thanks for having me. I'm really delighted to be a part of this conversation with you all.
Yeah, I'm delighted that you're here, Ann, too. Thank you, and Rob and Kammy. And I just want to add to this that I consider my invitation to step into a leadership role through Greater Boston Interfaith organizing as basically, it felt to me like another conversion. I felt like I was being invited to take my deep convictions that Jesus called us to be church in the world, to take it into the world, and to build relationships with others that I met in my neighborhood, other people of faith, other people of who were teachers and were labor organizers, and Muslims and Jews and Christians of other traditions, who were all outside my church building, but deeply working, deeply caring about the issues that I cared about, and the joy that I experienced as I learned the practices that Kammy was referring to, that we're going to talk about some more. Really, I consider it another conversion. So, all right. So, let's see. Rob, I think I want to ask this first question to you. What is organizing? And what specifically does it mean to be part of a community organizing group? So, like, what do you do?
Well, you organize people, and you organize power, and you organize money, right? So those are, like, if you talk to organizers, those are the things that they focus on. But it's primarily, for me, it's about relationship, and partly why this has been particularly meaningful in my setting and in my congregation and in my ministry is because I just naturally a sort of an extroverted relational person. And so this idea of, making a difference, being a part of justice. I've got a poll that's popping up here in the middle of my screen.
Move it away.
Just
click
ignore
it.
that.
You don't have to worry about that.
Sorry. I was trying to look at the green dot, and there, all of a sudden, that popped up. So anyway, I've lost my train of thought.
That's all right. I'll give you help here. When you say organizing people,
help me
so
out.
as a clergy leader, what difference? What do you do that's different because of the organizing training that you have?
Yeah, so that's right. I was talking about the relational thing. And so you spoke a minute ago about kind of your own conversion experience. And for me, I had kind of a transformation, a change experience 6 or 7 years ago when we did relational training work, and our organizers here in Milwaukee with Common Ground brought together pastors and clergy to sit down together and specifically talk about how the principles of community organizing, particularly in relational conversations, and the idea of a relational meeting and how that's different from any other conversation that you might have. We learned that process, and I started to use that in my congregational setting. Some of my colleagues did as well, and it really kind of transformed us. Somebody earlier said something about, community organizing and church go hand in hand. I can't remember exactly what the words were, but that they're the same thing. And so that's been a key piece of that for me. And so what a relational meeting is it's a 45-minute or an hour public conversation with one other person, where you talk about what really matters to you, what gets you up in the morning, what makes you angry. We talk about righteous anger sometimes, and that's a positive thing and not a bad thing. And so I've used these principles in my pastoral care and in my work with new members. One of my big responsibilities in the congregation is the welcome and integration of new members into the life of the congregation. And so I've incorporated this work as I learn about what matters to people and where those things overlap with the call and the ministry and mission of the church. And that's helped me both in my congregational setting, but also helped in work that I do outside of the congregation with community organizing, understanding like where our personal self-interests overlap with the interests and the mission and the values of the organization, and trying to make change there. That's where we can do things. And also the freedom to say, hey, I may have met a really wonderful person, but we're not on the same page, and being okay with that too. I hope I've answered that question. I've tried to give a little bit of some information for folks about that relational meeting thing and why that's so important to community organizing.
Yeah. So Kammy, you're just doing the ground, laying the groundwork right now for establishing a new affiliate member in the DART National Network. So I imagine you're spending a lot of time talking to people who don't know very much about what community organizing is or why they might want to participate in it. So how do you describe? What do you say when, when someone says, what is community organizing?
Yeah, well, first of all, I don't always call it that to begin with.
That's a good clue.
And I want to pick up on something that Rob said that I think is foundational for me. And that is, he said he was an extrovert. So naturally, that kind of connecting with people. Well, that's exactly what I want to work against. That I chose and specifically around working around congregation-based organizing, because this is not something that just people who are extroverted or just people who care about justice or care about education or whatever specific issue. This literally is a non-negotiable aspect of being a living, breathing person of faith that all of us have the requirement to do and to be. Mm-hmm. And so I'm an INFP and one of the most eternally disorganized people you've ever met. I did not come by this being an organizer stuff naturally. I don't do this because it's my skill set. I do it because I can't be whole without it. And the church can't be church without exercising these practices and building the muscles of organizing. The reality is evil is organized. The power without love will be reckless and abusive. It will organize itself to accomplish its selfish ends. I want love to be effective and to be well organized so that we're accomplishing what a God of love intends for God's creation, what the church exists for, which is to be that, body of Christ in the world. And so anyway, I came into organizing, the specific question that the organizer asked me when I only came with one other person to the annual assembly in action was, so without judgment, but I remember he said, you told me that what drives you in ministry and in being a leader in the church is that you know your love for your children as a mother is every bit the same as the love of other mothers in this community, people like Tara and her children, Terrence and Cleve, and yet you know that their love cannot accomplish for their children what you want and hope for your children, and that all mothers do, because of systemic forces at work. And so that's why you wanted to be part of this Interfaith coalition. So were the other things you were doing as important as that to you, that you chose to do instead of practice these principles? And I just burst into tears because they weren't. And I wasn't living my greatest value of love effectively and with power. And so that's why I'm dying for these congregations in Pensacola to have access to and practice these principles and tools, because it will help them love with power. It'll help them live into being effective in their love. I don't want to be an ineffective mother. I don't want my love to mean that my kids still end up being powerless in their lives to have healthy, happy ways of living. And no mother wants to be ineffective. I want our congregations to be effective and not irrelevant and weak and sentimental and anemic. So that's part of my definition around organizing and reason for wanting congregations to participate in is it so that they'll move beyond being just spiritual direction centers or pastoral caregivers, but to be powerful lovers that are helping people live fully and in every way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I know that your work as there in Arizona is focusing on education. So how do the other congregations that are part of Save Our Schools Arizona, how do they connect with each other, and how does SOS Arizona help them do that?
That's a really good question, and I think to a certain extent we're still figuring it out. But I do want to kind of touch on a little bit of what Kammy was talking about with power, because as a parent, as a mother of children who are in public schools, that notion of claiming power is really important. And as I've worked with educators, especially as we near our state's first statewide teacher walkout, this idea of power terrifies some of the teachers that I've spoken to. You know, because we love what we do, if we are teachers or if we're mothers, the idea that this is about power is kind of a turnoff. And some of my work has really been to say, you know, the purpose, it's all about power. It's all political. It's all about power. And our job right now is to help reset the power balance so that the power serves the people. The power doesn't kind of crush the people. And right now the power in our state is crushing people. It's crushing families. It's crushing teachers. It's crushing communities. I think that we have a lot of work in our state to do in terms of reclaiming the power of institutions. Churches are not necessarily places where my peers hang out. And so it has been very natural fit to organize at the school playground, at pickup, at drop off, through the PTOs and PTAs, and in very relational conversations, and building that goodwill over several years in a school district with parents who I've known since their kids were kindergartners. I mean, in a way, that's a central call of a pastor of a parish, right? When we used to have families who would come to the same church for generations, and we knew they would come every week at the same time on the same day. Well, where else is that happening? That's happening in schools. And so I really do feel like that's a place that we can, so that is how Save Our Schools has organized, is through our school connections. We are working to include the faith community, and I am still learning what some of the limitations of that are for this particular purpose of public education. And there are some limitations. We have, I don't know that I want to get into them actually right now, but there are some limitations that we're facing. One thing that we're doing though is that we're using church space as staging grounds for all kinds of things. And so, for example, tonight I'll be at the Valley Unitarian Universalist Church in Chandler giving a presentation on education funding. And on Sunday I'll be at the Quaker House. And last night I was at the Mennonite community. And so really kind of calling on colleagues to offer space for the work of social change. Churches are also stepping up in a big way right now to provide food, nutritional food, space, a clean space, a safe space during the walkout. We have a lot of churches who have said, we will do this. And that has been very encouraging. So,
for the children, is that
yeah,
yeah, for the
and
children.
especially in low-income communities where parents do not have the privilege to take a day off.
Right. Who will watch the children, right? So I want to talk a little bit about how a congregation that has no experience, along the lines of what the three of you are talking about, how a congregation comes to decide that it wants to say yes to this way of being in its community. And I'm thinking, I'm not sure which of you would want to talk about that. Rob, you came in as a leader already, as I understood it, already called to this form of leadership. Is that correct? Or do you want to take a shot at answering that question? So how is it that a congregation decides?
Yeah, I can start. I'm sorry, say that again, Lally. There was a little pause.
Yeah, no, I was just repeating the question because I said the question and then I said your name, and that's not really fair. So Rob, how does a congregation decide or discern that it wants to participate as an entity in this form of community engagement?
Yes. So I'll do my best to just share a little bit of our experience. I think you were asking about our congregational size too, perhaps. We're about 550, 600 members. And I think for us, it's kind of a core part of our culture, our values already, or social justice mission. There was something here, I think in the notes that said something about, what's the difference between service and charity and justice.
Mm-hmm.
And this, we were a congregation that, of people who are generous, kind, giving with their resources of time and money to service, and funds as well. But this doing justice, I think, points to some of what Kammy was saying earlier about the core values of what it means to be Christian and faithful and to live that. And this is an opportunity for us to live into that in a new way that we hadn't been doing already. And I think that was what was enticing, if that's the right word, or attractive to members of this congregation to get involved with community organizing. It also gave us an opportunity, I'll be really honest, to say it gave us an opportunity to meet with people and to do work across denominations, across faith traditions in a way that we really hadn't been doing before. We've been part of the Interfaith conference in our city for a long time, but this was actually a way to, make things happen that we just maybe talked about before. That's one of the things I really love about community organizing, is it's not just a lot of talk. We actually do things, and we develop campaigns that we think are winnable and that we're going to make a difference in. And all of those things I think are attractive to people.
So
when we first started talking about this, go ahead. Yeah.
I just want to follow up on that and ask you to go a little bit deeper. And so what are some of the kinds of things that you and the members of your congregation have been able to accomplish because you've been working collaboratively in the community? What are some of those outcomes, some of the winnable campaigns?
Yeah, well, some of our members were very involved around 2008, 2009, shortly after Common Ground was founded. We identified a major issue with foreclosures in the city of Milwaukee, and particularly through research identified a particular neighborhood. Our congregation members were able to be very involved in a larger campaign. With this is Common Ground is, over 50 congregations and organizations in Milwaukee, and we're just one of them. But we've had, of our 600 members, probably 100 or 150 who've been involved in some way, shape, or form over the last 10 years. So specifically, this Faces of Foreclosure campaign that we in 2008, 2009, we were able to get $33 million from 4 major banks that were holding foreclosed homes in the Milwaukee area. We developed our own 501c3 and rehabbed those homes. About 100 homes or so in this neighborhood over the last 10 years that have been rehabbed and put back into the community, not to be sold to landlords, but to be sold to homeowners. That's like one example of some of the campaigns. Actually, we're celebrating our 10th anniversary this Sunday of Common Ground, and so some of these things, like what we've done, I don't know, the successes we've had over the last 10 years are kind of fresh in some of our minds.
That's a great
I don't know
example.
that's a little bit more broad than just the congregational setting, but that's an example of the difference people can make in their community through their congregation.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was looking for. Is that way of building cumulative power that you can then direct towards a specific issue. Kammy, do you have a story of your own about a winnable campaign or an impact that you've seen happen because congregations were working collaboratively?
Yeah, so maybe I'll start with the original question and move to that real quickly because it does progress that way. So when congregations are deciding, I'll go with St. George Episcopal Church in Jacksonville, Florida, on Fort George Island, congregation with maybe 130 on Sundays. They started with house meetings primarily. And I just want to first of all share that as a resource. I had been rector of St. George's for 10 years, and I am a very relational person, but we have such a programmatic, results-oriented kind of consumer culture that affects the church even, that the very act of holding house meetings throughout the congregation, specifically to build relationships and deepen relationships, was life-changing. I remember being in Amy Dyer's living room, and this group of people that I'd known and loved for almost 10 years was having a conversation about when they first experienced injustice, and hearing the senior warden cry about her experience in a southern elementary school in the lunchroom with the girl of color who always sat by herself, and weeping, and never having had that level of depth of conversation because we were busy doing church work before. So first of all, it begins with looking at choosing to live a relational culture and being real neighbors in love with each other and with what gives us our greatest anger and pain as well as joy. And then recognizing that we can act on that if and only when we work together, not just as a congregation, but with those beyond our walls. And so my first experience, our congregation's first experience after the year when only one person showed up after the email I sent, was my practicing these practices with the house meetings and connecting people's experiences to what we were doing, and to the fact that Jacksonville had one of the highest infant mortality rates in the country in some zip codes of the city that were as high as third world countries. And so for them to see and connect that their house meetings and their relationships with each other, networking their whole congregation, our small congregation, so that we could have over 50 people turn out and bring together with others throughout the city of Jacksonville, so that almost 2,000 people showed up, so that the 6 CEOs of the 6 hospitals in Jacksonville could be asked yes or no, bringing that relational power together, yes or no, will you implement the baby-friendly practices that the World Health Organization has outlined as reducing infant mortality so that all our children have the opportunity to survive their first days and years even. And seeing that loving relational power called every one of those busy CEOs who needed to turn a profit to be able to say yes, gave them the will to say yes to that, and that they would work with us over the coming years, so that now Jacksonville's infant mortality rate has plummeted and is better than it's ever been, was a sense of powerfulness for a small congregation to turn out 50 people instead of 2, to be able to change death into life, like we proclaim in our celebration of Eucharist each day, was, I think, a conversion experience for all of us.
Kammy, I want to stay with that because that's such a powerful story. So what, over time, what difference did it make to that congregation that they had this extraordinary success by working and collaborating? What kind of transformation was happening relationally, internally, and people's faith journeys? And
yeah, so I'm not going to be great at answering that question for that church, because out of that experience, I decided to go serve a church with 6,000 members so that I could try it out and turn out 1,500 people the next time. So all of that's to say that I can't speak for them, but what I'll answer that question for the church that I worked to organize the following year around educational issues, implementing and accessing millions of more dollars that were being wasted and unused because of not providing wraparound support for voluntary pre-K programs that were free. We weren't providing wraparound childcare for the half-day VPK programs so that lower income and struggling families could access those VPK quality education programs so that their children had a decent shot in the educational system. I organized with iCare and Christ Church in Jacksonville around that Nehemiah action the following year. And this is what I heard people say. I heard teenagers and 93-year-olds go, "Oh, now I get it. This is what Jesus was doing, isn't it? He was speaking truth to power. He was taking his love for all God's children so that it made a difference for all of them and not just for the people in our own church." I mean, it was, the 93-year-old at Vickers Landing said, "I'll never miss one of these again." I don't know how many she's able to do in the years since I left there to go to the seminary, but as well as having teenagers say, "Oh, the church makes a difference in the world. It's not irrelevant." Just that range of experience for people of all ages, so that everybody who didn't consider themselves to be a leader, everybody could bring 3 people with them once a year, so that the average worship attendance of Christ Church on Sunday morning or in any place could be the same attendance that we had at that assembly. Was eye-opening, that everybody could do something at least once a year. I could at least get my mom and stepdad and husband to turn out to something I had power over in relationship to them, that could make a difference. Was exciting for everybody, and they got the sense that they could, that they could exercise that power in loving ways.
And is SOS Arizona organizing congregations, or is most of your work organizing individual parents?
So I am the new kid on the block for sure with this panel. Save Our Schools Arizona is 1 year old, and it was started with a very, very specific task. And the task was to gather enough signatures to put a referendum on November's ballot to stop the expansion of the voucher program in Arizona. And so I don't know that we would necessarily say that there had been groundwork laid via community organizing to make that happen, but we were able to make it happen. We have the signatures, it'll be on the ballot. And
congratulations.
Now, it's a big deal. It hadn't ever been done before in the state of Arizona. It was all volunteer driven. We paid no one to collect signatures. And so, but through that field work, I intend, and it is my hope, to bring practices of community organizing to the way that we do our field work and our campaign management going forward. And especially the way that we engage faith communities to do, like Kammy, you are articulating so beautifully, like, this is the church. Like, this is the church. This is the work of the church. This is the work of God. This is like doing what Jesus did, right? And so that temptation to be distracted by, and I don't mean to begrudge mother-daughter teas or rummage sales, but that's not the work of the church, right? The work of the church is to be in relationship with creation and with God's people. And so any way that we can do that as people of faith, I think, is community organizing. I forget the original question. I apologize.
Well, I didn't
remind me where I'm going with this.
No, I had asked if you were working in congregations, because I didn't want to ask you a question that didn't suit your context. But this question about how have you seen participants in Save Our Schools Arizona be affected by their participation, right? So it's like you can get all these amazing things done, but it also turns out that in the journey, in the relational and collective journey to getting those big wins, you also are being changed as a person. And so I just wondered whether you had any reflections to add.
Yeah, I mean, just the fruit of empowerment. So we have it has been remarkable to watch how people have seen that they do have power and that they can use it, and that when we use it together, something beautiful happens. So Sunday night from 4 to 7, we had a strategy meeting for site liaisons, school site liaisons. So parents who are saying, I will work with teachers who are walking out, and I will be a point of contact. And we role played the knocking on the canvassing conversation, and we role played like why we're doing this, and we role played how to deal with the grumpy neighbor and how to deal with the angry neighbor, and it was really, really, really wonderful, because it's similar when you do house meetings in a congregation. These are women that we all run in the same circles, but this was actual concrete work, and we had a purpose, and we left with a plan. And I think when that happens, I've seen that people come back, right? So they come back because they know that the tools that they have to be successful are working, and people want to continue to be successful. And more people care, I think, than we realize. And I think that those people are mostly, at least in my context here in Arizona with my peer group, outside of the congregational life. So it's an interesting question about how to bridge the two together.
Yeah. I want to circle back to something, Kammy, that you said earlier in this call, and you were referring to the practices and principles of community organizing as being the missing. I think your phrase was the missing essential practices of discipleship.
Mm-hmm.
And I know from my my local congregation here on Cape Cod, where I live, has a partnership with the elementary school in our biggest city that serves the highest proportion of children of poverty in our whole town. And I've brought my training in community organizing into all of that work. And one of the things that has meant for me is that our meetings, when we have a meeting at church, when this team meets at church, we are really organized. We have an agenda. We know what we're trying to accomplish. We share roles and responsibilities. And it means that, unlike a lot of church committees, we actually get a lot of stuff done.
Yeah.
And then that means that the folks who are busy, who want to be making a difference in their communities, are much more willing to participate, because they know that we're going to respect their time. And it's not that we don't have fun. We do have fun, but those two things are not mutually exclusive at all.
That's right.
Yeah, you just named that it is. I mean, if for no other reason than people, pastors, and congregations just wanted to develop leadership in the congregations,
Right.
You should do this work. It was a way to take just loving good people and help them be able to know how to lead well. Leadership is not a natural born trait. It's something that we cultivate and teach and guide people in. And I'd been a priest for 15 years, but I can't tell you that I knew how to run a meeting well, because no one ever taught me. And until the organizers sat down and said, you should plan an agenda in advance in a way that really can help you, meet with people ahead of time to find out. Anyway, all the tools that organizing helped put together for leadership development, how to train someone to be a leader. I didn't know how to do that. And
So Rob, talk about how, let's see, I'm going to give you two questions, and you can answer whichever one you want to answer.
Okay.
One is, we were just talking about the formation of leaders within our congregations, and how passing on the training that we receive as an organizer, cultivating those skills within our congregations can help congregational leaders. So that one option would be for you to reflect on that. And the other is to talk about your own sense of spirituality in organizing, and how it feeds your soul. You could do both if you want to. But they're really different questions.
I'm not sure what I can add to what I said earlier about in terms of the experience of church members. I heard what you saying, Lally, was about how this has helped develop, being a part of a community organizing has helped develop leadership.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Within our congregation. I certainly know that it's been a part, it's been important to folks to be a part of this, and to also, you know, one of the things I was thinking as Kammy was reflecting a few minutes ago on leadership and what that means, and whether or not people are taught to do that. You know, for me and my community organizing and what we've done in our congregation, one of the things that's been important and meaningful for folks is to understand that leadership can sometimes be about being able to deliver followers, to deliver folks, to show up and to turn out and to make a difference. And I know that that has been an important piece of that. I'm going to let somebody else take the second question about the spirituality piece, I think, if that would be okay.
Of course. All right. Andy,
Jump in there.
Kammy, yeah, go ahead.
And I'll be brief.
Please,
So you
Kammy.
get to share. And so one of the things is I've watched how people's discovery of scripture and of the Bible has just come alive. It's like, oh, now I can see what was happening here so differently. Or we practice reading from the margins of not just of if we can have a better developed sense of theology around power, then it's okay for us to look at scripture and say how stories get told, both scripturally and in our own day, from different perspectives in that power continuum or perspective. Anyway, so the Bible study has taken on a different kind of centrality and aliveness or freshness, I think, for people in congregations and in my spirituality. The other is, I'll just say personally, one of my greatest joys is seeing in our church, we have a prayer of thanksgiving for diversity, of appreciating that the only way we grow to love the way God loves is in ever expanding circles of people who differ most from us. And I've just seen people come to know and love and experience the deep stories and shared values of people that are so different from them that they never would have crossed paths before. And so it's like they find this communion that doesn't necessarily get expressed in bread and wine, but the sense of unity and communion that brings them together across the things that are so polarizing and divisive and isolating these days. And I think people are desperate for that. And so that's been the water for drink for a parched soul that I get to see happen a lot more.
Mm-hmm. Great. Anne, do you have anything that you want to add to this strand of the conversation?
With regards to spirituality, I think a lot about spirituality of liberation. And those were some of the primary texts that I was presented with, even in high school, I don't think anyone realized how radical it was in my confirmation class to show us the film Romero, which is the story of Oscar Romero in El Salvador. But that narrative stuck with me and is still a guiding narrative in my life. Christian-based communities working in El Salvador, doing scripture study and really studying the scripture of, Exodus and freedom from slavery. And how does that apply today? What does that mean to me today? I think that, a spirituality of liberation, I think, and then of connectedness, right? Relationship. So the Dorothy Day piece, we've all known the long loneliness and the only answer is community. And I think people respond to community that is true and authentic and liberating, I think. And I also wanted to touch a little bit on this notion of busyness in churches and sort of especially at a program-sized church, or maybe even a little bit of a smaller-sized church where it's just so hard to let go of doing the things that we've always done. But it is so important to be able to let go. And so I think some spiritual direction on the spirituality of letting go, the spirituality of I think there's something there. I think as we work with our congregations who are just really struggling to find their purpose in this new context that we have, I think there's something there about learning how to say goodbye, spirituality of death and dying, spirituality of letting go, all for the purpose of resurrection and all for the purpose of liberation. But I think some of that, I wonder about this, and I'm curious what the other panelists have to think about this, but just that role of educating, maybe in tandem with or in prior to kind of coming in with an agenda to be a congregational based organizing community. How do we, what stories do we tell, and how do we kind of prime the pump so that when we do come in, and maybe we don't ever come in just kind of, we're going to be a congregational community organizing group and we're going to use this model, but maybe how do we do it a little bit differently? How does the conversation start, and what stories and teachings are necessary for congregations to be open to the idea of organizing? Is a question that I have.
Kammy, do you want to share some of your thoughts and experience? Because as I understand it, that's exactly what you're working on right now.
Yeah, well, I think you're absolutely on to something. And when you talk about it being related to letting go and death and resurrection of our postmodern culture, and what is the purpose of church now, and to not just be a cultural club. And I think that's where we're going to find our purpose, is in recognizing that if we go back to just what is most essential about faith, do justice, love kindness, walk humbly with God. If we go back to, it's all about relationship and transformation, and how can we use the relationships that we have with each other and God to have the most transformational impact on the most people, for God's dream to come true. We're going to find the church has a whole new sense of life and purpose and meaning in a world that is kind of done with church for the sake of serving an institution. And that's exciting me. It's, I think the decline that religious institutions are experiencing is going to continue. And I've seen it happen in individual small congregations in rural areas. But when they recover this sense of purpose and these practices, it's kind of like, who the hell cares? Because we're doing what Jesus is doing, and so
it's liberating,
and it's making a difference, and it's liberating. Yeah.
So thank you so much, folks. We're gonna I'm gonna turn to Mary Liz now. I know that there are a couple of questions that are key from our participants. Mary Liz, what do you want to queue up?
I think the first question I have, so we have a variety of people on the call with us, and a lot of them, most of them have experience in organizing or are currently organizing, which is great. And we have some folks from Parents for Public Education National on the call with us, and and Becky is on the call, and she's from Mississippi, in the Mississippi chapter, and they would like to be engaging people of faith and congregations in their work, which is mostly currently comprised of secular community groups. And so they're looking for some tips and information on how they might be able to approach congregations and start conversations with them about getting involved in the work and how they might support the work. And I have a specific follow-up question to that as well, but I'll start there. And I thought, Anne, you might have some knowledge right off the bat, since you are in a community organizing group working specifically with churches.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a good strategy. So it's Parents for Public Education in Mississippi?
So she's part of National, but she's based in Mississippi, and she was talking about some of the initiatives they're doing in Mississippi. But I think across the board, they're looking for tools to help their chapters engage people of faith.
My role at Save Our Schools is I'm on the advisory board, so it's actually not a paid position. And I think if you can within your networks, and maybe even within some of the broad-based community organizations that might already be in existence around your chapters, to bring into your leadership people who have, power, authority in a good way, good power, good authority that can be leveraged to collaborate with the faith community, I think could be a good starting point. But also I wonder too, like just about finding your various, like here we have Valley Interfaith Project and we have Pima Interfaith Project, and it's all part of the same group, Rob, that you're affiliated with, right? It's all part of AIF. So that would be what I would suggest. Is there a broad-based community organizing group in Mississippi or in any of the areas where your chapters are that you could begin a conversation?
Great. Yeah, I think that's a great.
The other thing.
Yeah, go ahead. I want to invite Kammy in here. Go ahead, Kammy. Yeah.
The only thing I might add that's maybe really basic, but is I find that I have to start with the clergy. It's not that we're clergy-centric, but if there's any sense that you've gone around the structures of leadership that churches have chosen, including clergy leadership, in order to access connectedness with congregations, even if it's for a valiant purpose, that will be resisted or resented. So starting with the clergy, I think, is important. And just, tell me about your experience as a child in school or with your children in public schools, and engaging them around their personal stories first. And then I think asking them to introduce you in hosting some, doing some one-to-ones and having some leaders host house meetings to bring together members of the congregation within the congregation to talk about it with each other before you start moving outside of the congregation to connect them with other parents for public education or other institutions might be one thought. So they see it as essential to their life together as a congregation and their leadership structure.
Great.
Yeah, I would just add to that.
I just have a quick correction. It's Parents for Public Schools. That was my mistake, but I just wanted to correct. Go ahead, Rob. What were you going to say?
I was just going to say, a place to start too is just to find out within their own organization what are people parts of congregations and what congregations, and to have one-on-one conversations with those people in their group that are already committed to this overall mission and idea, and then talk to their pastors and have one-on-one and just build up from there. You also might reach out if there's an interfaith conference or any group like that, an executive director of an interfaith group, you might just have a one-on-one conversation with to see, if there's work being done, if there's people or congregations that already are thinking along these lines, that would be a place to start too.
Great. And I think following up on that idea and Kammy's recommendation to get to clergy, you may also check out your local council of churches and the executive directors there and all of the member churches of that council. That's a good ground to find lots of people who are connected. A follow-up question to that's a little bit more specific is, have any of your churches or any of the churches you've been involved with who do community organizing, either individually or through statewide legislation, had their 501c3 statuses challenged or put into jeopardy over advocacy work?
So I can address that. That's something we're in the middle of right now. No, I have not been a part of that. I think it's a concern. I think a very important strategic key to community organizing is that it is a nonpartisan conversation and it is a nonpartisan relationship. And so, and Save Our Schools Arizona can claim that with authenticity and integrity. So we do not receive money from candidates. We do not promote candidates. Our focus is on procuring funds for public education, and we will work with whoever wants to work with us to that end. And I think as long as clergy and parish communities are very clear, and that's where I feel like there is going to need to be, especially in congregations where this is new, there needs to be a primer. There needs to be kind of like a little bit of 101 education, or maybe a leadership team is assembled to do some real, some homework on what it is and what it isn't, because it's very counterintuitive. It's basically the opposite of everything we're doing in churches right now. It's not programming. We're not asking people for anything. We're building relationships.
Counterculture.
And yeah, it is. It's counterculture. It's counterintuitive. People will resist because it will feel like you're not getting anything done, because it's very slow work and it doesn't happen overnight. And it's not task oriented either, right? It's relationship oriented. And so there's a steep learning curve, and it's a big cultural shift in congregations. And so if you lay that groundwork correctly, you will not have your status challenged, because there's no reason to challenge it.
We try to talk about political but nonpartisan. We use that a lot, particularly in our congregational setting. And when we preach about these things, we try not to shy away. We say Jesus was political. He started a lot of this, right? So that those are key things. And from a organizing perspective, I know some community organizing groups actually have perhaps double have a status that allows them to, if there was a question or concern, they can operate in a, not a congregation, but a community organizing group can do that. That might be worth a question if folks are interested in that. I'm sure some IAF groups or other leaders could help with that.
So All Our Children has a resource that some of you might find helpful. One of our previous panel discussions was on the separation of church and state. And we talked at some length about what the law says and what it doesn't say, and what the purpose of the law is, and how we as practitioners in this work, in fact, we were focusing on those of us who recruit volunteers to build relationships with local congregations, what we can do to set the minds of the school leaders at ease, because of course they are responsible for the well-being of the children. So there's that webinar is available online and might be a resource for folks who are thinking about this.
Yeah, and I'm going to share some links to some specific resources that focus on what 501c3s are and aren't allowed to do in terms of advocacy. There are some good guides out there, but I think if you're a secular organization or even faith-based organizing group that wants to be recruiting more churches, and you're coming up against barriers where people say, well, we're really afraid our status is going to be challenged, you want to be equipped to talk about what they are and aren't allowed to do, and how they can fit into what you do. So if you're part of a really partisan organizing group, that's going to be a challenge for you to recruit other 501c3s. But if you are advocating an issue in a nonpartisan way, it doesn't mean that they can't be involved. Okay, I have one other question here, and I'm doing some interpretation of this question from Michelle. I sent you a response, but I haven't heard back from you yet. But she asks, and I think this has to do with the community organizing groups, so groups like Common Ground, groups like Save Our Schools, Kammy, other groups you've been involved in. What has been the participation level of African-American congregations? Do you have any statistics on that?
Well, I can speak from the Milwaukee context that that's been a key part of who we've tried to be in Milwaukee, a multiracial organization. So we set a goal. Common Ground has set a goal for our 10th anniversary celebration on Sunday, our annual assembly. We're hoping to have about 1,500 people, and our goal is to have a third white folks and a third African American folks and a third Hispanic folks, to be reflective of the organization itself. And that has been, it was a mostly from the very beginning, a lot of the folks who actually started the work were from white congregations, predominantly white congregations, and it's been a goal from the very beginning to be a more diverse organization. And Milwaukee is sometimes said to be one of the most segregated cities in the country. People don't often think of that because of our geography, but that's one of the realities. So that's been a really important piece of our identity, and something that we've made a goal, that if we're really going to be about everyone in the community and serving the common good, finding the common ground for the whole community, that we need to be an organization that reflects the whole community in all its different ways, shapes, and forms. Yeah, I think that's really important, and it goes back to, you know, those core relationships that we try to build with one another.
Ditto.
Kammy, did you want to add some more?
Just ditto, just that's pretty much starting with those congregations has been my approach here in Pensacola, and working out from the recommendations of the African American community about who else in the congregations needs to be a part of things. So thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
I would add that as we think about racial diversity, we also think about economic diversity, and that it often breaks along race lines, but it often doesn't. And so to really be inclusive of lower SES communities when we can, and that takes courage to move out of our comfort zone. So add that.
One of the places where my growth curve around organizing and my growth curve around being a leader for race equity and addressing issues of white supremacy, one of the places where those two learning curves have connected is around something that you were talking about earlier, where I think, Anne, you started this thread with saying how countercultural community organizing might seem for some people because it's so relational and it seems so not task-oriented. I've come to see that my focus on being task-oriented is part of the enculturation of white supremacy culture that I've absorbed, and so for me, it's been a relief to practice letting go of that and to lean into relationships and to breathe into being alongside people in ways that that the organizing principles and practices actually also teach us directly how to do. So that's an alignment. And so that comment, you know, that may or may not translate to congregations of different racial and ethnic backgrounds.
Yeah,
it may not be counterintuitive to everybody, but it sure was to me as a
that's a very good point. That's a very good point.
So thank you, folks. It's time for us to turn towards closing our conversation this afternoon. It's just been great to have everybody with us. Mary Liz, do you want to queue up the evaluation?
Yep, I have it. It's right
Thank you. We value your feedback. We try to be continuously learning, and Mary Liz is putting a link into the chat box right now for you to fill out a very brief 3-minute survey. So you can actually fill it out while we come to closure here on the call. Really, we really want your honest responses. We take these very seriously, and we always incorporate what we've learned from each one as we move forward. In addition, we invite you to use the chat box to reflect in writing on what has worked well for you on this call, what do you appreciate, what do you want to celebrate and lift up, that you want to affirm, so that we make sure to keep doing that. And what could we do differently next time to make this the experience of this webinar more meaningful and more helpful to you? As I mentioned at the opening of the call, a recording of this webinar will be available on our Facebook page and will also be posted on our website. In a couple of minutes, when we close, the presenters and the AOC staff are going to stay on the line because we're going to do a debrief. But when we sign off, we wish our participants well and send you off into the afternoon. But first, a little bit more information about some upcoming opportunities through All Our Children. In addition to these panel discussions that we have on the 4th Tuesday of every month, on the first Tuesday of every month, so next week, we have a direct instruction presentation where we've asked one practitioner who has a deep expertise in an area to come and lead us in something like a seminar. And we're delighted that next week we'll be joined by Professor Genevieve Siegel-Hawley of Virginia Commonwealth University, who has done research on segregation in schools and the difference where we are actually now in 2018 in terms of the rate of racial isolation or segregation in our schools, and what difference it makes in the learning experience of children and communities. And finally, next month, in the month of May, we are launching our online learning cohort. This is an opportunity for partnership leaders who are interested in creating, committing to one another in order to go together along a journey over several months in which we share with one another our commitments to leadership and our goals, and we support one another in accomplishing those goals. So the application to participate that is coming up Monday of next week, and there's still a few spaces left. So if you're interested in that, you can apply at allourchildren.org/cohort. So again, thank you all for being with us. Thank you especially to our panelists, to Ann Ellsworth and Kammy Young and Rob Ater. And we wish each of you good luck and best wishes. We know, Ann, you've got a big thing happening there in Arizona when all the teachers are going out on a statewide strike. And,
Walkout is the
a walkout. It's not a strike.
It's not. It's not a strike. It's a walkout. Yeah.
It's a walkout, and we appreciate your leadership.
We appreciate your prayers.
All right, great.
Absolutely.
Thanks, everybody.